Welcome to TV1 Canada. You're watching FASLA Canada 2011. I'm your host Imran Mia with my co-host Naveed Mansoor. We're bringing you this program because we're in a very important federal election, in the midst of a very important federal election. And through this program, we want to give you an opportunity to get to know some of the local candidates, as well as some of the issues that are federal and are concerns of Canadians. And in our studios today, we're very pleased to have somebody who's come all the way from Calgary, Minister of Citizenship, Immigration and Multiculturalism, the Honorable JaysonKenny. Welcome, Jason.
Good to be here. Thank you very much, Imran. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. So, Mr. Kenny, first question is that we are heading into the fourth election during the past 7 years. It looks like it's never going to end. Why is that? I mean,
that's a very good question. That's the first question everyone asks me when I meet them during the election. Why are we having a campaign? I think Canadians are perplexed because things in Canada are going pretty well. We have the strongest economy in the developed world. The strongest rate of economic growth, job creation, stable financial sector, strong fiscal position. But we're having the fourth election in 7 years. And if we don't resolve this with the majority, there's a reasonably good prospect that we'll have a fifth election in 7 or 8 years. Look, I think it's happening because the opposition parties, we've been a minority for 5 years, one election in between, which is the longest serving minority government in actually Canadian history.
Right.
And I think that it just became frustrating for the opposition parties. They simply, after a while, in a minority context, the opposition parties feel frustrated. They want a chance to clean house, and so they forced an election. Now Canadians appear to be saying, we generally have confidence in the Harper Conservative government. If we don't end up with the majority on May the 2nd, we'll either have another election fairly soon, or all of the opposition parties voting against the government, and perhaps Mr. Ignatieff with the support of the other parties coming into office. So it's a very peculiar situation. I don't think Canadians really want another election. So
the follow-up question was, what would happen if the Conservative Party doesn't get a strong majority?
We will present. Will probably let's say a Conservative minority is elected. We would be recalling Parliament to present a throne speech and a budget focused on economic growth and job creation. That would probably be at the end of May or beginning of June. All three opposition parties, I believe, have indicated their likelihood to vote against that budget, which means an expression of non-confidence, in which case Prime Minister Harper resigns, and either Mr. Ignatieff becomes Prime Minister with support of NDP and Bloc Québécois, or the Governor-General dissolves Parliament and calls another election. I don't even want to think about it.
Another election.
The second one this year, or fifth in 7 years, it's entirely possible.
That could be quite costly for Canadians.
Well, these cost $300 to $350 million.
Right.
And okay, that's the price of democracy, fine. But conventionally in Canadian democracy, we choose governments for about 4-year periods. Canadians are people who appreciate the virtue of stability in our political system. And we have a very strong economy, and I think people would like to see a political consensus that is as stable as the economy is.
Sure. Canadians are wondering, why hasn't Prime Minister Stephen Harper been able to get a strong majority? This is his third election.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Starting about 15 years ago, we saw the emergence of a new political dynamic in Canada with the Bloc Québécois, with them winning 30, 40, 50 seats in every election from Quebec. It's become very difficult for the the national federal parties to form a majority since then. But I think we have been able to demonstrate as a minority the ability to get things done. 5 years, longest minority in history, strongest economic record in the developed world, strongest growth rates this year and next, creation of 500,000 net new jobs in the last year and a half since the global economic downturn, low interest rates, low mortgage rates, a strong currency, the best fiscal position in the G8. these are not modest achievements. That's actually pretty significant. On many other fronts, we've managed to get legislation through. One example would be I managed to get unanimous support for a fundamental reform of the Canadian refugee asylum system.
Right.
Passed a lot of other legislation. So we've been, I think, actually pretty productive as a minority. But as long as the Bloc Québécois continues to sort of take 40 seats off the table, it means that a federal party has to form a majority of the other, out of the other roughly 260 seats, and that's not easy.
True. So there then comes a question of coalition, which is exactly something that was over and over mentioned as a sign of content against the opposition. It seems like it has turned out to be a bad word somehow, and even though it looks like it is part of the process, like it is a legitimate process where the coalition governments are formed in other countries such as Australia, New Zealand, you name it. There are quite a few out there.
Yeah.
So what does it make it a problem?
It's not a question of whether it's legal or not. It's a question of whether it's desirable or not. And here's the problem that we have. In November of 2008, we had an election which returned an increased conservative minority government. So we won the election by a pretty wide margin. Then, just a few weeks later, the opposition parties expressed their intention to reverse the government and install Mr. Dion in as Prime Minister through a written agreement with the New Democratic Party and the Bloc Québécois. They had a press conference, they announced this was their intention. Well, this struck most Canadians as being rather peculiar because, first of all, we don't actually have a tradition of coalition governments in Canada.
Right.
It's legal, but it's not conventional. It's only happened in wartime. And that's the first point. The second point is none of the three opposition parties ran seeking a mandate to form a coalition. They all denied it. They said they weren't interested in it. And so this struck Canadians in December of 2008 as really rather peculiar, that all of a sudden the party they elected as government would be removed from power.
Right. And
what they found most troublesome was that a party dedicated to the destruction of Canada, the separatist Bloc Québécois, would be sharing in power. Finally, we would make the case that this kind of opposition coalition would be against the country's economic interests because it would have three parties, all of whom are dedicated to increasing taxes, and we believe, irresponsible levels of public spending. And we think that would destabilize Canada's economy. So, Canadians can decide on May the 2nd.
So we do agree that it's a legitimate form of parliamentary.
It's constitutionally possible, yes.
In a situation where the other two opposition parties win enough seats, they could potentially exclude the Bloc Québécois and form a coalition between the two of them.
That's theoretically possible, but in the last parliament, the opposition parties to govern together did require the support of the Bloc Québécois, and that would be, the most likely scenario in the future is that you would require all three opposition parties cooperating in some form of coalition in order to remove the Conservatives from office, and we just don't think that's in the country's best interests.
Right. Now, with the polls looking
all over the place
in the Conservative
yes.
Party's favor, NDP surging in Quebec. What do you think the scenario is going to be on May 2nd?
Well, your guess is as good as mine. These polls are all over the map. I guess one thing we know is that I guess first of all, there's a large body of Canadians, about 50%, who are pretty satisfied with the direction of the country and the government, the economy,
right.
and pretty comfortable with Stephen Harper's leadership. On the other side, the opposition side of the spectrum, there's a lot of confusion about where to go. And I think the one thing I see in all of these polls is a steady decline for the Liberal Party. They must be wondering why they forced this election when they started much higher than they are now. I think that's maybe that's a good thing for Canadian democracy, to have clearer choices. I guess if there's any good news in this, it's that the Bloc Québécois, which is dedicated to the destruction of Canada, would appear to be losing support. So I think all Canadian nationalists will be happy if the Separatist Party loses seats in Parliament. So I think that's probably a happy thing.
Now, there's been a lot of talk about the 905 And I know you've been...
I practically live here.
You practically live here. Well,
Yes.
you were born in Oakville.
Yes, that's right.
You moved out west.
Yes.
Now you're coming back quite often.
Yes.
How's your experience been, trying to win hearts and minds in the 905?
Very, very positive. Just today, I think I've been to 8 separate chai parties in Brampton with with families and neighbors who are now supporting the Conservative Party. 905 is a suburban and to some extent what we call ex-urban area, new growth, new development. A lot of middle-class families. Their focus is being able to pay that mortgage. It's financial security. It's making sure there's a stable job. That's their focus. And so the government's message, the Conservative message about economic growth, job creation, financial security resonates quite well in those with those voters. Secondly, there's a large and growing number of new Canadians in the 905, which is actually kind of interesting. In a lot of developed countries, new immigrants go into the center of the old cities.
Right.
Here in Canada, they go out into the suburbs. And for us, that's very good news because a recent poll indicated that 47% of immigrants to Canada intend to vote Conservative in this election, giving us a 14-point lead amongst so-called new Canadians, people born abroad that moved to Canada. And we're getting a very, very positive response amongst new Canadians in suburban metropolitan Toronto. And I think that's because, without being too generalizing about this, most immigrants, most new Canadians have essentially what we would call conservative values. They believe profoundly in the work ethic. They think hard work should be rewarded. They're entrepreneurial. They're risk takers. They support business. Those are all natural conservative economic values. On social values, they see the family as the core of society. And our message about strong families, support for parents, that parents know better what's in the interest of their children than bureaucrats, that resonates very well. Respect for tradition, including religious freedom. Well, tomorrow the Prime Minister will be making a special announcement about Canada promoting and protecting religious freedom abroad. And respect for tradition is a core conservative value. So on the issue of law and order, most new Canadians are completely intolerant of criminality. They don't see why convicted criminals should be allowed on the streets. So on all of those values issues, there's a real alignment, and we're seeing that increasing our support in the Metro Belt.
We're going to go for a short break.
Please.
And when we come back, we'll talk about immigration and other issues.
Great.
We're going away for a short break. Keep watching TV1 Canada. We'll be right back.
This is TV1. You are watching Faisla 2011. I am Naveed Manzoor along with my co-host, Mr. Imran Mia. And today in our studios we have a very special guest, a Minister of Citizenship, Immigration and Multiculturalism, the Honorable Mr. JaysonKenny. Welcome back, Mr. Kenny.
Thank you very much, Naveed.
Minister Kenny, we've been talking about the elections, we've been talking about the economy. There's an important issue that Pakistanis of Canadian origin are concerned with, which is your file, which is your portfolio, is the immigration. Recently, there was a report, a press release that was published by 40 leading lawyers. It was referenced in the Vancouver Sun, suggesting that the time to process visa applications have increased, and the number of visas issued, particularly around the family reunification, have decreased from 16,000 to 11,000 last year. What would you say?
Well, actually, I would say that, first of all, most of the immigration lawyers who signed that letter are big liberals or New Democrats. This is the normal thing you expect in an election campaign. And that letter was based on basically a collection of sort of what I would call half-truths and exaggerations. Here's the truth. When the previous Liberal government came to office in 1993, in their first 5 years in office, they cut immigration by 32%, and they cut family class immigration by 38%. I have the facts right here. In fact, it's not my opinion. It's a fact. And then our government has increased overall immigration levels to the highest level ever for a government in Canada. We've welcomed 254,000 permanent residents per year on average since we came to office, which is 14% higher than the Liberals. We've also increased family-sponsored immigration by about 17%. So we are welcoming 63,500 sponsored family members per year on average, as opposed to 60,200 under the Liberals. We've also increased parental reunification. The last 2 years of the Liberal government, they only admitted about 12,500 parents and grandparents. We've been admitting about 17,000 on average. I've made it clear that we will admit between 16 and 17,000 parents and grandparents in 2011, an increase over last year. So there is a misunderstanding on that based on, I don't know what.
The report actually suggested that the wait time would lead up to almost 13 years.
Yeah, that's not, I just categorically reject that.
Okay.
When we came to office, the Liberals had left, because they cut immigration in their first 5 years, and they cut the budget for Immigration Canada. By 2006, when they were kicked out of office, they had left behind a backlog of 830,000 immigration applications, 108,000 in the parental program, and a waiting time in that program of 64 months. On average, since we took office, processing time for parents' reunification has been 58 months, slightly less than under the Liberals. It went down in 2007, it's up a little bit, but the bottom line is this. It will not be 13 years. I heard one Liberal MP last week say it was going to be 18 years. If they keep going down in the polls, by next week it'll be 25 years, I'm sure. Bottom line is this. I am committed to reducing wait times for family reunification. That will be one of our priorities if we're re-elected.
Sir, on the same note, coming back to the timelines of how these processings are done, sounds like besides just the family reunification, there is other class of visas which are for immigrants purely who are applying for the first time. They somehow feel that their processing time has increased since your government came in. Why is that? Yeah. Is there a reason?
Well, again, on the skilled worker program, which is largely what you're talking about, we inherited from the Liberals a backlog of over 540,000 applications and wait times of up to 7 years for the skilled worker program when we came to office. And that's what those Liberal lawyers aren't telling you, which is that the wait times and the backlogs weren't created by this government, they were inherited by the Conservative government. We have taken measures, opposed by the same lawyers who signed that letter, to rationalize the number of incoming applications, reduce the backlog as we've done, and to speed up the processing times. And here's the fact. New applicants under the skilled worker program are getting processed and admitted in less than a year, new applicants. There are still a lot of people waiting in the queue, and we have to deal with them. But the good news is this. New applicants are getting admitted within a year, and I've actually met some of them. I'm so excited. Recently I met a physician, actually, I think from Karachi, who applied only 10 months ago, and he's now living in Edmonton, Alberta. So that program is, for new applicants, moving much faster now.
So that means the promise that you had made on your visit to Pakistan about looking into the matter and decreasing the time for these type of visas.
Well, it's not just for Pakistan. It's
an overall.
It's overall. Although again, I want to be very clear about this. Regrettably, there's still hundreds of thousands of people in the old backlog, and we are going to get to those, but they will be waiting. It's the new applicants who are getting faster treatment.
So is there any, is it because you have changed the process now and whatever is on the backlog from before would remain there, or is there some way of overcoming that backlog? Because I'm sure people have like to know.
Let me just give you a very big picture answer. Canada, okay, there are more people that want to immigrate here than we could ever possibly accept. There are something like, we estimate, 2 billion people who would like to immigrate to Canada?
2 billion.
Well, that's according to Gallup International. They did a poll on migration last year around the world, and they estimated 2 billion people would like to. I suspect it's actually more than that if people were given a choice. Every year we receive about 450,000 applications of for various immigration programs, family sponsorship, skilled worker, etc. But we can't land all of those people. We can't admit all of those people because we have to have jobs for them. We have to have housing. We have to have health care. We have to put them through the immigration process. So there is a practical limit to how many we can admit.
Right.
Now, our government is admitting the highest level of immigration in the developed world, 0.8% of our population. By way of comparison, that's 5 times higher per capita than the United Kingdom, which has put a cap of 100,000 on immigration. We are also welcoming the highest number of immigrants to Canada in our history. Last year, 281,000 new permanent residents, the highest number since the Second World War. So we have the highest levels ever in Canada, the highest immigration levels per capita in the developed world, but we're always getting more applications, and they're sitting in these backlogs. There is no simple and easy answer to it. This is a function of the fact that we are far more popular in the world than we can possibly accommodate.
Absolutely. I want to bring it back to home. You've been out there talking to many different communities, different people, and you're known as a minister of curry in a hurry.
Yes.
You've been talking to various different communities, different cultures. What has your experience been getting to know some of these new Canadians?
It's been phenomenal, and actually so much of what I've done as minister has been because of my proximity, my contact with new Canadians. I often say that I've been in a non-stop 3-year focus group, or 4, actually going on now 5 years as Minister for Multiculturalism. And you know what's given me confidence, because what I've heard over and over again from new Canadians is a desire to integrate, a desire to have an equal opportunity to work hard, and a commitment to Canada, and a commitment, for example, to integrity in the immigration system. That's why I've had the courage to do some controversial things, like reform our broken refugee asylum system, like crack down on crooked consultants through our new law and our new, more accountable regulator, like raise the issue of immigration fraud overseas in Pakistan, India, and elsewhere with those governments, because that is a problem for our system. It's one of the reasons there are a lot of visa rejections in South Asia, because so many are submitted by unscrupulous and dishonest immigration agents on behalf of their clients. It's why I've taken steps to crack down on human smuggling, because I find most new Canadians are intolerant of queue jumping. And so much of what we've done has actually been informed by that contact I've had with new Canadians.
Just wondering, since you've been to Pakistan a few times already, I'm sure our viewers are interested in finding out how was your visit, and what do you have to say about that, and what do you think about our culture, the values, and especially the Pakistani Canadians here would be interested to know if you have any message for them.
Well, thank you. First of all, the very first country I went to as Minister of Immigration in January of 2009 was to Pakistan, just as the first country that Prime Minister Harper went to was to Pakistan when he went there in March of 2006. We are very proud of our record. We, in fact, have more than tripled Canada's development assistance to Pakistan to focus on things like public education, teacher training, and basic development projects, particularly in the Punjab region of Pakistan. We've been the largest per capita contributor to disaster relief, both the 2005 earthquake, the 2007 the 2009 Swat Valley refugee crisis, and last year's flooding. We contributed $76 million, matching every private donation made. And I think the government of Pakistan recognizes and appreciates that huge Canadian solidarity. I went most recently, a few weeks ago, on the tragic reason to attend the funeral of my dear friend, the late Shahbaz Bhatti, who I had welcomed to Canada just before. He told me when he was in Ottawa that he expected that he was going to be murdered, and he was a very brave voice for all of the people of Pakistan, because it's not just Christians and religious minorities who are victims of violence and persecution, or even the abuse of the blasphemy laws. It's Muslims who are the main victims of these things. As Prime Minister Gilani pointed out to me, I had very lengthy meeting with Prime Minister Gilani, several members of his cabinet, a very lengthy meeting with Interior Minister Rehman Malik, and I contacted my friend Sherry Rahman when I was there. You know, Pakistan, my impression is Pakistan is struggling, obviously. You know, it could and should go in the economic direction of, say, India, with the educated middle class, with the inheritance of the legal institutions and rule of law. It should go in that direction. There's no reason, with the advantages it has, it shouldn't be a prosperous developing country. Or, and I don't want to, please don't take offense, but with the Talibanization that we see in parts of Pakistan, there are people that want to drag it in the direction of Afghanistan in terms of violence and extremism and ignorance. I'm so passionate about how we must find practical ways to support voices of moderation, the educated middle class. We must combat this kind of ignorance and this kind of prejudice that exists. You know, when I see the state government of Punjab putting up banners in Lahore inciting people to hate Ahmadiyyas, or when I see people preaching against Christians, when I see the kind of thing that led to Shahbaz Bhati's death, it makes me grieve. This is not the vision of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. This is not the vision of the founders of Pakistan. We need to go back to that original vision. That's my view.
Thank you very much, Minister Kenny. It's been a pleasure talking to you. We want to wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good luck with the elections.
Thank you.